This is Harry Haney, and I lead the Supply and Value Chain Center here at Loyola University, Chicago. I'd like to welcome you all this afternoon to this webinar, which is hosted by the Office of Sustainability, the Baumhart Center, and the Supply Chain Center here at Loyola. We are very pleased to be hosting this conversation about sustainability in buildings. Seth, do you want to go to the agenda slide, please? There we go. Very shortly, we're going to turn it over to our terrific panelists, Dan Evans, Arthi Gowda, and Brian Imus, and our moderator, Loyola's own Aaron Dernbaugh. We also want to know who's joined us today, so please feel free to introduce yourself using the chat function. And this will also be where we encourage you to ask questions of our presenters as we've scheduled plenty of time for Q&A. The webinar is being recorded, and we will have it posted on the Baumhart Center's past events page within the next day or so. Next, Loyola strives to be, we strive to be a leader in sustainability for our region, and we're proud of our initiatives, both academically and with our physical infrastructure. We've been consistently recognized for sustainability efforts with recent awards from the U.S. Department of Education and a third gold rating in STARS, the Higher Education Sustainability Reporting System. Our sustainability efforts are anchored in our tradition as a Jesuit institution committed to social justice and mutual respect. And our office is housed in the Institute of Environmental Sustainability. Aaron's office is, and we're Seth and I are in the business school, and we encourage any of you on this meeting to look at our Masters of Environmental Science, as well as our professional certificates in both sustainability and various business applications. Next one. Our colleagues are working with me on this webinar, Seth Green, who's the founding director of the Baumhart Center, and Aaron Dernbaugh, the Director of Sustainability. The Baumhart Center and the Supply Chain Center are based in the Quinlan School of Business, and both have innovative programs connecting business to purpose. Quinlan is one of the top business schools in the world, leading globally on social purpose, and was recognized in the Financial Times as excellent in 4 categories on responsible business education, with only 4 other business schools in the world. So there are some programs of note that we'd like to mention. The first of its kind, we have a Baumhart Scholars MBA program that works with education at the intersection of business and purpose, and a soon-to-be forthcoming Masters in Sustainability and Supply Chain Management, as well as awards programs for business leading on responsible and sustainable businesses. Next slide. This 4-part, today's session is one of the third in a 4-part series meant to explore even more common ground regarding sustainability and social justice. And we hope you'll join us next week for a final conversation on a more sustainable Chicago for all. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to our moderator, Aaron Dernbaugh, to introduce our presenters and share a few words. Aaron?
Thanks so much, Harry. As Harry just said, my name is Aaron Dernbaugh. I'm Loyola's Director of Sustainability, and it's been such a pleasure to partner with Seth Green with the Baumhart Center and Harry with Supply and Value Chain Center here at Loyola for this series. Thanks to you, our audience, for being with us today. As you can see in the introductions coming through the chat, we have a diverse audience for the webinar, including anywhere from full-time sustainability professionals to business executives to Loyola students. So I don't know where all of you hail from, but for many, like Loyola, you're on land that was once home of Indigenous people. Loyola sits on the ancestral homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwa, the Ottawa, and the Potawatomi tribes, and was a place of trade for many other tribes. Many Native Americans still live and share the land with us, and we recognize and celebrate the history of local Native Americans and their ties to the land. We also must recognize a national history of racism, sexism, and other discrimination that's shaped and harmed our society, leaving many disadvantaged. Loyola fosters a transformative cultural experience that honors diversity and social justice. We embrace inclusivity, mutual respect, inherent freedoms, and the dignity of giving each perspective a voice. We commit ourselves to developing deeper partnerships and programs that advocate for this progress, dignity, and humanity of all. Just as Loyola has our carbon neutrality goal for 2025, these are also commitments that Loyola makes towards sustainability. So today, we have a terrific panel that's going to share with us the role of buildings and the built environment in affecting sustainability and equity in our region. So allow me just to do some brief introductions before I turn it over to them. Ann Evans is the Chief Executive Officer of Elevate Energy, a nonprofit dedicated to designing and implementing energy efficiency programs that lower costs, protect the environment, ensure those benefits reach those who need them most. Ann has worked in energy efficiency and affordable housing for over 25 years. She is the lead researcher for Chicago's Climate Action Plan and the Regional Energy Plan for CMAP, and is an instructor at the School of Public Health at U of I Chicago. Arthi Gowda is the team leader for SOM Chicago's Performative Design Group, charged with researching new technologies and recommending integrated environmental solutions for SOM projects worldwide. She's also an educator, lecturing at both Foundation University and the Illinois Institute of Technology, and she co-chairs the American Institute of Architects 2030 Working Group, an effort to make all new buildings carbon neutral by 2030. Brian Imus is the Executive Director for Illinois Green Alliance. Illinois Green is a state chapter of US Green Building Council, or USGBC. Brian and his team promote green building and sustainable communities. With a membership of over 500 leading architecture and engineering firms from across the state, they're working to put Chicago on a path towards a carbon positive future. Our topics for today are buildings, energy, community, and resilience. Buildings and the energy they consume are the primary source of greenhouse gas emissions for our region, making up 65 to 70% of our carbon pollution. We have a fairly built up region with a lot of existing building stock and utility infrastructure in place. At the same time, we see a transformation in the electricity sector with wind, solar, and decentralized energy production growing in leaps and bounds due to falling costs and the removal of policy barriers. Meanwhile, we have communities struggling with disinvestment and population shifts, leaving contaminated land and disadvantaged residents and businesses. We have areas of growth and economic development that create pressure on infrastructure in those communities they're based. In the last 5 months, we've seen a massive change in what work looks like. For some, that means moving from one room to another and logging on for your day's work. For others, it means the risk and exposure to perform essential roles, keeping the lights on and groceries on our shelves. Underneath all of this, we have the urgency of climate change. We're on track for 2020 to be one of the hottest global years on record. The 5 hottest Julys happened in the last 5 years, and 9 of the hottest 10 since 2005. As parts of our economy reopens, we see emissions surging and air quality decreasing. And yet there's an opportunity to build back better, to use economic stimulus and technological innovation to design communities and buildings that work for everyone. We've invited our presenters to share some opening remarks on today's topics, and then we're going to open up for questions. Just a reminder, please introduce yourself in the chat and start thinking about those questions that you'll enter into the chat so that we can collect them and ask them of our presenters as we listen to the panel's observation. So Ann, we're going to get started with you. Take it away.
Thank you, Aaron. And it's so nice to be here with some of my old friends and some of my new friends. So it's great to, I'm really happy to join this conversation. And I want to start by going to the next slide and telling you a little bit about Elevate Energy. We are a nonprofit based here in Chicago, but working nationally to address climate change and promote more equitable solutions for people. So we are focused on people and the planet. And we design and implement programs that really drive benefits to the people who need it most, no matter where you live or who you are. To tell you a little bit more about our programs on the next slide, we are showing some examples of the people that we work with every day. So we run energy efficiency and water efficiency and renewable energy programs that benefit nonprofits and social service agencies, including daycares, affordable housing, and help people preserve and stay in their homes. We know that real estate is one of the ways that we pass down wealth from generation to generation. And so maintaining housing is really critical, and I think we all know today, as many of us are working from home, the importance of keeping the lights on, being able to cool our homes if it's hot where you are today. I know it's a little bit warm in the kitchen I'm working in. So these programs where we're really improving the efficiency of the homes by installing high efficiency equipment, installing solar panels, improving the insulation are really, really critical. And we're preserving affordable multifamily housing so that renters also can have someplace safe to shelter in place. And then finally, we work with public sector, with cities, with counties and states to help them develop climate and resiliency plans and then really move into the implementation stage where they're implementing those plans. So as Erin said, there's huge opportunity for investment as we reinvest in our existing building stock that drives real benefits for the folks that need it most. So driving down those utility bills is really critical. As we go to the next slide, we also want to underline the importance of the workforce. The clean energy jobs and clean water jobs are jobs of the future. And so there's huge opportunity, and it is an opportunity for inclusive growth if we do it intentionally by implementing good policies like in Illinois, the Future Energy Jobs Act. If we intentionally make these investments for the people who need it most and these are real opportunities for creating wealth. Those folks that you're looking at are all people who've been trained recently and are now working in the solar industry in Illinois. And that is a quick summary of who we are and what we do. And I'm looking forward to your questions.
All right, turning it over to Arthi. Yeah, go ahead. Take it away, Arthi. Thank you.
Sorry, Erin. Hi, everyone. I'm Arthi Gowda with SOM. If you go to the next slide, Erin. If any of you know or don't know about SOM, we're a large AE firm. Globally practicing, this is just a quick Google search to give you an idea. We work on big, complicated, tall projects, those planning, architectural, and that's essentially what we're known for. And what I do at SOM is I am a team leader for a performance group, which is looking at all aspects of sustainability, and we're half architects, half engineers. If you go to the next slide. And so a lot of our work, different than Anne's, is actually the analytical side. You know, our architects and planners are quite well versed in some of the community aspects of sustainability. Although we talk about that in our work as sustainability team leaders, a lot of our focus is actually on what is the analysis that helps drive design, and working with teams specific on their projects, but also on global processes to help improve the way we assess and integrate sustainability into projects. So what you're seeing here is an example almost of the way that we look at all the different data characteristics, architectural, for a project. And the point we were trying to make as we made these kind of non-project specific tools is that, you know, when you look at the bottom, you see these black dots. Maybe that's something you see graphically. And those are all specific types of analysis that we leverage to improve performance on projects, going anywhere from solar, energy, renewable, CFD, both for external and internal thermal comfort, daylighting and glare. And what we saw consistently, and the point we are making as a collective, is that the more analysis that we do, and select analysis that helps improve design, the better performing our projects are. So the big number is actually the predicted energy use intensity and the climate zone. So ultimately, that's our goal, is the big 8 ball to drive down carbon. Next, and we think, you know, analysis can improve that. During Aaron's kind introduction, he mentioned that I'm co-chair with Scott Farbman of the AIA 2030 Working Group here in Chicago. And I think I just want to share with everyone on the call, particularly the students, it's not just our work professionally that's important, but it's the committee work. It's working with people like Brian. He'll be introducing himself next. And collectively, we can change things a lot faster. So this is actually looking at our improvements for signatories to the AIA 2030 commitment, with a drive, a push of several of us in the city to share that it is important to try to reduce carbon with a goal of being net zero by 2030. One thing after we were doing this signatory drive, AIA National was essentially saying, hey guys, Chicago's up on the board every time. So we can have a difference and we can share our resources together. If you go to the next slide. And what we're finding from the AIA 2030 commitment, which is a voluntary program where we submit what our predicted energy use intensity is as architects and engineers, is that different programs have different levels of performance. And so here you're seeing each bin of the data as a different program type. And we've gone into a fair amount of data analytics on this. And you can see that there are these plateaus. Those data smears are actually the code and lead. And then there are also peaks in performance. So you see those as they climb higher, those are projects approaching net zero or fully net zero. And so as we start talking as a community, we see that most firms have a net zero or they're able to get to that. But code and policy is really critical. So this is a conversation that I think the AE community is very much getting involved in, important to get involved in. Next. Another commitment that I think would be of interest to this group is also the Architects Declare Pledge. I'm currently on the steering committee for this, and it's started in the UK, but the idea is that we as collective disciplines declare that there's a climate emergency. I think it's pretty telling that within the year and a half this is up, 4,500 firms have pledged to this. And you'll see that it's all over the world that they're popping up, that we recognize that there is a climate emergency and that we have to work collectively to share our resources in order to realize the very big goals that we need to get to in the next 10 years to bend the carbon curve. I think one of the interesting things about the US Architects Declare is that we have declared that it's a climate justice and biodiversity emergency. And this started as a climate and biodiversity emergency in the original pledge. So I think it's something that's really of interest to all of us. Obviously, Loyola is bringing to the forefront, but all of these things are very much interrelated. So excited to talk to all of you today about that.
Thanks, Arthi. And now I will turn it over to Brian for your comments.
All right, thank you, Aaron, and thank you to Loyola, Seth, and Aaron for pulling together this topic and the opportunity. I'm particularly thrilled to be able to join a panel with Ann and Arthi. I think Illinois Green Alliance is in a really unique position to address the role of the role the built environment plays in addressing the threat of climate change. We're a nonprofit mission-based organization, but we're also membership-based. Our members are professionals tied to buildings in some way, real estate developers, architects, product manufacturers, engineers, contractors, and they associate with Illinois Green Alliance because what they do professionally aligns with a personal passion that they have for protecting the environment. If you go to the next slide, it provides some good context for Illinois Green's perspective on the topic. I think it's worth highlighting what was really a catalyst for building our unique network of professionals, the Center for Green Technology. The project, a retrofit of an abandoned industrial building owned by the city of Chicago, was really inspired by a bunch of passionate AEC professionals who convinced the city to allow the retrofit of the building to offices and community and nonprofit space. The result was the first certified leadership in energy and environmental design, or LEED, platinum municipal building in the world. It became a signature project for the community here, and it inspired our members and the region's interest in LEED as a market-based tool to advance sustainability in buildings. In fact, since that time, Illinois, year in and year out, has led the nation in the most LEED square footage certified every single year. Thanks to Loyola for helping with those rankings. About 4 years ago, our board of directors decided we wanted to go beyond LEED and do more to actually address climate change. how could we leverage our unique network of green building professionals to bring sustainability technology to more places that really, frankly, have been overlooked by the green building movement. We won't get to carbon free without impacting every neighborhood. We've got to address energy use in existing buildings, not just look at new construction. And to impact every neighborhood, then we need to address equity and inclusion in all of the work that we do. So we got around the idea of carbon drawdown strategies, which is a list of technologies and best practices that we know reduce pollution, but also have other benefits to people and communities. There are 90 of these carbon drawdown strategies, things like district heating, refrigerant management, alternative cement, bicycle infrastructure, LED lighting that we know reduce and actually in some instances literally draw carbon out of the air, and also have benefits like saving people money on their utility bills, creating jobs, or improving health outcomes and making our neighborhoods more resilient. And like LEED, it's a framework that can be used by professionals that design, build, retrofit, and operate buildings. Go to the next slide and you'll get a good sense of the resulting strategic plan from those conversations with our board and our members. It's really an epic challenge for green building professionals here in Illinois to mainstream the use of carbon drawdown strategies. And we came up with really 3 strategic goals to focus us. One is to educate 30,000 people to socialize the concepts of carbon drawdown. It's not just good enough for green building professionals to be using carbon drawdown in their projects, but how can they be giving back and educating the public as well about the actions they can be taking? Second, we wanted to make sure that over the next couple of years, 3,500 buildings implemented carbon drawdown. So we showed that it worked. And then third, we wanted to make sure that we were doing this in every single one of Chicago's 77 neighborhoods by partnering with community groups. We wanted to avoid making the mistake of just focusing on where we already had relationships and connections and force our members to be able to reach to and partner with new people and new organizations. There's been a lot of programs we've developed, all involve creating ways for professionals tied to green building to share their expertise and lend their time. Things like the Green Built Home Tour intended to grow the market demand for the construction of passive house homes, net zero ready homes, and even what low-cost actions homeowners can take in their own homes. We formed a building codes SWAT team where professionals weigh in on policy issues and educate lawmakers about the practical implications of new policy. One of my favorites, it was just something that we did on a single day, an energy benchmarking data jam where our members, engineers volunteered their time to educate Chicago Housing Authority facility managers at 33 of their buildings on how to manage and measure their energy use. That energy benchmarking data jam actually has led to other programs leading the Chicago Housing Authority to consider how they could fund major retrofits and develop plans for clean energy. In all cases, to reach more buildings in more places, all of these projects and education and outreach, it's about partnerships. A really good example, our members have been volunteering to help the Chicago Urban League to identify ways carbon drawdown could lead to energy efficiencies in the building that they own, and ways that their own experience as they've acted on those strategies, how it could benefit their constituents and how they could engage their own constituents. If you go to the last slide, we are tracking our impact. We're being transparent, and we think that that is really important because that will drive industries to act on these strategies. And that impact map lives on our website, and it's a way for our members to know that they're making a difference, and it's a way to educate others on and also hold us accountable to our own strategic goals. The reality is we're a small organization. The education, the advocacy, the community service projects, they're all meaningful. But if we're going to make the impact that we need to see the market drive action. And I think AEC professionals have a unique role to play in doing that. And I think so do large private and public sector organizations headquartered here in Illinois. And I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Anne and Arthi, for your comments as well. I'd love to get folks entering some questions. I see some are coming through the chat. I'll try and reflect those, but let me just jump in to a topic you each touched on, and that is the equity dialogue and where the common ground is between some of these sustainability conversations and the equity and justice conversation, national, global conversation we're having at this moment. Sorry, I realized my camera's off. There we go. And you talked about it in your remarks. I know that's really a focus of what Elevate does. Arthi, the commitment reflecting justice as well as climate and biodiversity. And of course, Brian, Illinois Greens works in community and partnerships like you talked about. So I don't know who wants to take it first, but I guess my question would be sort of when those discussions start, where do you find natural alignment? Where is the first place of common ground? And are there any areas that maybe feel challenging to address and find alignment when we're having the sustainability and equity and climate discussion?
I'll jump in.
Yeah, go Ann.
Sure, I'll jump in.
Thanks.
Yeah, so I think we know that whenever there is some kind of huge stressor, be it a pandemic, be it a extreme weather event like heat waves, or Hurricane Katrina, for example, we know that communities of color and lower wealth are disproportionately hit. We also know that if we had made investments in those communities, they would have been more resilient. So if you imagine today, people who have been surviving through this incredibly difficult time, they haven't had to pay their utility bills because there's been a utility bill moratorium. If we had made investments in those homes so that their utility bills were substantially lower, it's really easy. We know the technology is there to reduce utility bills, cut them in half very easily. And we also know we can go even lower than that. We have the technology. Those folks would be in a much more protected state. We know that the utility bill disconnection notices are starting to go out now, wherever you are. And it might be a little bit different because we're all in different stages of this pandemic. But can you imagine the stress of needing to shelter in place and know that you can't pay your utility bills now? I think where we could do substantially better is if we could take a step back and look at where the investments are getting made, be it taxpayer dollars or utility ratepayer dollars. We have seen there's been study and study, and I'll try to put one in the chat. There's one that UC Berkeley did that showed that the vast majority of investments that are made these are societal investments again, are made in the forms of rebates and tax credits that benefit the upper end of the economic society. So, and we're really lacking in getting the investments where they're needed most.
Thanks, Ann. Brian, Arthi, thoughts on where that common ground is? Oh, Brian, you're muted. There you go.
So, I just where I see the greatest alignment is around job creation. And I think there's great alignment where sustainability creates jobs, and the underserved communities, they need jobs. And we've actually been able to partner with some community organizations who their missions have nothing to do with green building or sustainability. It's about workforce development training. And that's what draws them and their interest to wanting to develop new skills around green building, for example. So I see huge alignment there. I did want to add, though, that it's over the last few years, there are organizational structural changes that have had to be made at Illinois Green Alliance so that our words match our deeds as we are thinking about wanting to reach more places and more communities that we've never reached before. We had to think about how do we educate ourselves? How do we make changes structurally to our board of directors? How do we train our volunteers so that they can do a better job of connecting with communities and being of value to the communities that we're connecting with?
I think I finally figured out the unmute.
There you go.
Although I should know that by now. But I think at SOM too, we've been talking, and I think broadly as an AE community, about a couple of aspects of the justice conversation. So office culture itself. And I think recognizing that the pipeline of talent that's coming into specifically planning and architecture, but engineering as well, is not as diverse. So, you know, when you look at the slide of SOM's projects, you know, it's diverse, it's around the world, but you know, how do we make it more diverse? So that has been, I think, a very important conversation. And it's similar to what Brian is saying. How do our good intentions, which we all have good intentions, actually match? And how do we challenge ourselves constructively? I think the second one is really how we as planners, architects, and engineers really engage communities. And it's wonderful and humbling to be on a panel with Anne and Brian, who their work is so much more steeped in that. I've been saying this around the office for a little bit of time, that we can become inadvertent Robert Moses. And for those of you who have studied planning, you know, this is frankly a very racist planner. And we kind of fall into this trap of doing these things that have the histories of redlining and putting highways and other eminent domain projects in communities that just can't fight back. And we see that with the pipeline intervention. So I think that brings me to the third point, which is not that any of us have that intention at all. But, you know, when we work on big projects, we can inadvertently support that. And, you know, I think one of the reasons, there's a lot of reasons that I enjoy working at SOM. One is that there is a high bar of projects to come into the office. And I think that's changing and evolving every day. So that kind of brings me to the third point, which is advocacy. It is hard in the current capitalist environment to really advocate for everything because we don't monetize sustainability correctly. So capitalism can adjust and should adjust for the climate emergency. And part of that is this justice issue. So when Anne says that we haven't invested, well, why haven't we invested there? Because it makes less money. And that's not the right value that any of us have. So I think that's on all of us to think about, how do we say, you know, lives are valuable, and the human potential of people in these communities is much more valuable than the way we've structured financial incentives like TIF, the TIF program, for instance, which just, it continues to reconcentrate wealth in areas that perhaps don't need it to be successful.
Thanks, Arthi. I'm going to stay. I know we have some great questions coming through, and I want to get to those in a second, but I want to stay for a moment on this finance discussion, partially because this is co-hosted by our business school. And we know we have a number of folks, business executives and MBA students and others that are stepping into that world. So can you, any of you, speak a little bit more about how sustainability, equity becomes or can be translated into the financial dialogue, because many of these decisions are made, you know, not at the design table, right? They're made at the accounting table or in the accounting spreadsheet, and how to, you know, Brian, when you're talking to firms that are, you know, sustainability leaders, but have very real financial limitations, and talking to people at all different levels across our communities about their financial, you know, decision making, you know, I guess that, where's the common ground in a financial discussion?
That is a $1 million question, and one that we all really struggle with. What I experience in the community, there are a lot of great showcase signature net zero projects, but they're too few and far between. The conversations I hear quite a bit is, how do we scale that work? Obviously, we try to do that by showing off those showcases and doing more to promote them. I do think that there might be an answer in looking back at the experience with the growth of LEED as a market driver, and how that grew here in Illinois. Every year I've had the opportunity to talk about why Illinois leads in the most LEED square footage, again and again and again. And oftentimes people think it's because there were these passionate architects who were driving that. But in a lot of instances, I think it might have been the other way around. There were large corporations headquartered in Illinois, companies like McDonald's, Grainger, Walgreens, who built one of the, a kind of a net zero experimental pharmacy in Evanston. And they were driving the AEC community to figure out how to do LEED and how to experiment with some of these new sustainable building practices and technologies. And so I think it's interesting to think about how those companies started to recognize that there was value in telling their story about how sustainable they were. And then that drove the AEC community to respond.
I think this is a great question, and I often get asked, what is the cost of sustainability on a project? Which is, the wrong question to ask. I think one thing that would be really important for the real estate students and professionals to take away is just, we come to the table and the budget is the budget. So our approach to it is really, we balance the budget, and we're balancing all the considerations of design, and sustainability is a big part of that. But some tactics that we've had that we're starting to be more successful with teams that are, I think, greener, or development teams that are more greener, is to have a very, very small sustainable contingency. For instance, on some projects, it's not even that much. It's maybe $500,000, but you would be surprised how a lot of these things could have traction with that little money on a multi-million-dollar project. So you can imagine that concept going further in all kinds of applications, but it's really building on things like LEED that have given us market traction, a lot of market traction to bring down the cost. So people are always expecting to hear a very big sticker cost for this, but it's not to have things like electric vehicles or electric boilers or some of the things that would really draw down the carbon on our projects.
Yeah, and I would just add that if we could take this opportunity to think a little bit more broadly, actually a lot more broadly, I think that when we are thinking about buildings, we're not thinking about them as places with people and communities, and we need to. And if we could, we might be able to actually think about all the value that is provided by a net zero building or a green building of pick your flavor, and thinking about the reduced incidence of asthma and respiratory health disease for people who live and work in healthy buildings. I think we also tend to think about first cost and not lifetime cost. So encouraging folks to think under the lens of a total cost of ownership. When we work with affordable housing developers and they're just the developer, they're just driven by that first cost. But when they're the developer and the owner, and they're into a 30-year relationship with this place that they're creating and the community that they're creating, then they actually care about the total cost of ownership. They care about what is it going to cost to maintain. What if I put in a crappy, inefficient furnace instead of high efficiency, high quality equipment, my maintenance costs are going to be so much higher because I have to replace that cheaper, less efficient equipment. So I think, yeah, let's just like break down the way we've been doing things and create a new system that really values creating place.
And I would add to that, Anne, just one last thing though, because we see that in SOM, 80% of our projects have a green certification on them, but those that are owner operated perform better, and it's consistent. So I think the challenge to the real estate market is, if we're going to do speculative development projects, which we will continue to do, how do you have that mentality, the same mentality of a whole building model? And there are ways to finance it, and there is actually a value add. You know, you can sell for a higher rent if it's green.
So I'm going to stay sort of on this track just a little bit, but I'm going to shift the question. And I'm going to ask, and it was sort of one of the questions from our audience asked the role of corporate entities in Chicago on supporting the Clean Energy Jobs Act, which is a piece of potential legislation for the state of Illinois to continue to advance our clean and efficient energy system. What's the role, and this is just taking off of that, what is the role for private sector? In this, we certainly are talking about buildings and real estate and designers, but what should we expect of them, and how can we engage our private sector community, our corporate community, some of the who are on the call, and others are hoping to graduate and get jobs in those settings. What should we ask of them? What should our expectations be in addressing these climate and justice topics that we're discussing?
Well, I think we can start by saying thank you for leading the way, corporate partners like the RE100 group that have committed to 100% renewable and continue to voluntarily lead the way on decarbonizing the building sector and the transportation sector and other sectors in the absence of a federal policy to lead the way. So I think we say thank you, we applaud them, and then we ask them to do more because they're doing it because their employees are demanding it and their customers are demanding it. So we have to continue to give them a resounding, let's do more.
From my perspective, I'm thinking of a lot of the small businesses out across Illinois and their role in advocating for CEJA. And there are a lot of small businesses that support new policy. It again goes back to jobs. That's going to be the biggest motivator for lawmakers to want to support this. Is that there is a link between addressing the climate crisis and creating local jobs here in Illinois. And I think that the role that those businesses can play is to dispel the myths out there that it costs more money to do this or it's not feasible by actually pointing to the examples of what they're doing in the private sector to lawmakers.
And I might just say as an AE firm, that I think it's just connecting the dots. I mean, obviously we support this, and you saw that in the 2030 data. We just have these plateaus. So legislation and certifications really bump up our potential, but to dispel the myth of cost is one. But I think all of us have a role to play in advocating for this.
So, thank you. So shifting our focus just a little bit, let's talk. There was a question that was asked around sort of, Anne, you mentioned federal policy, but let's keep it a little bit more local at the city and county level. We know policies have changed. Some of the barriers have been removed. We've seen things with energy benchmarking, some of the energy code aspects in the building code. What more can the city, the county, and whatever the local sort of authorities are play in helping with these transitions? Brian?
Well, I've got a favorite one that I like to out that I think is really important. And I know it was a question that was asked in the chat just about what we do about the thousands of existing buildings out there. A great place for municipalities to act is around requiring building performance standards. There's only 4 in the country right now, but one of them is in St. Louis, enacted this year. And the policy simply requires buildings to meet a certain efficiency standard. And if they're not meeting that efficiency standard, then they need to either make operational or retrofit changes to be able to meet that standard. And then over time, for example, in St. Louis, every 5 years, they set that standard higher and higher and higher. So buildings are continually improving their performance.
That's a great one, Brian. Well, I think leadership matters. So I'm excited to see the new Chief Sustainability Officer at the City of Chicago, Angela Tovar, and her deep commitment to environmental justice. So yeah, there's a lot that the city can do. There's great examples from other cities, as Brian has mentioned. I would also highlight Boston's plan that has a big equity focus. There's, I don't think we need to, I think there's a lot of good policy out there, and we just need to adopt it and champion it and show the leadership around it.
Agree. And I think even there was not to totally discount federal leadership, but and building on your point that we should advocate locally if we can't get it done federally for things that are starting. So, you know, the House had passed their climate legislation last week, and the points that the AIA brought out that were really powerful was zero code and the 2030 commitment. You know, so driving towards bending the carbon curve, embodied carbon, energy efficiency in buildings, affordable housing, and energy efficiency linked there, weatherization assistance, electrification, renewables, and workforce development. So these are all things that we're talking about. And, you know, at a community level, we talk about this frequently, that we are, you know, dancing around the same topic. So why not borrow from these things for our own local markets where maybe we have more influence? They all have the same common themes.
Thanks. So I'm going to address a whole group of questions right now, because I think, you know, you're experts, you know, where the, what do you want to call it, where the secret sauce is hidden. And there were a series of questions around resources on some specific things like embodied energy, like this perception that green or sustainable is more expensive, like off-site construction, alternative product sourcing, and thinking about the resources that are at hand to make sure sustainable products are being sourced into these projects. And certainly, you know, clean energy, electrification, sort of those other necessary batteries, those other necessary transitions. I'm not going to ask for each of those, but if there are resources to share with our audience that you can think of that are sort of the places you go to, who you draw from. Obviously, we have one of them here with Illinois Green, with Brian, but others, and Arthi, your representation of 2030, are there others you want to share that sort of get at some of that? So folks who are listening, whatever the question they have, they can do some additional homework. Obviously, you can drop URLs in the chat as well, but if you list organizations, folks can jot them down and find them on the on this on their websites.
I mean, I would second, obviously, that Illinois Green and the USGBC are huge resources, and they have an umbrella of certifications under them that are specific. I think the Carbon Leadership Forum out of the Pacific Northwest is really doing some wonderful work related to embodied carbon. I think the Just City out of New York is doing some very interesting things in terms of community planning. And I would encourage people to download the Just City Essays, which is a series of essays that are from community activists. And I think they give a broad and varied perspective as to what kind of ways you can engage in your work. it would be very interesting to see, again, how does the real estate community, this is largely planners, architects and engineers, can think similarly how their actions could contribute to further justice in our cities.
One that comes to mind immediately is the Building Energy Exchange in New York City, where they are serving as a resource to building professionals in New York to be able to better meet some of the new policy requirements around energy efficiency in existing buildings. And they're doing some really innovative research and work that I think everybody should take a look at. And what's maybe a positive of the new work from home world is that a lot of their programs and events and resources are all online now. I appreciate the shout out to Illinois Green Alliance, and I would just say that the reason that we're effective is because of our members and because they get involved and engaged. I always make the point that I'm not necessarily the expert on all of these building technologies and the latest trends. It's really our members. And so I'd encourage folks to connect with our community and find ways to connect to our community, both to learn from our members, but to share your expertise with our members as well.
Thanks, Brian. Anne, any resources you want to share before?
Yeah, those were all great. I would also encourage you to take a look at the Institute for Market Transformation and the New Buildings Institute. They've done studies that show the value of green buildings. And I will try to put in the chat. We did a study of buildings, affordable multifamily buildings that we worked with, and showed that the net operating income increases by 4 to 6% for buildings that have been through a green retrofit. And that's driven not only by reduced energy costs, but by reduced maintenance costs and reduced vacancy, because people really do like living in green buildings.
And apologies for another shameless plug, but next week we have a 3-day conference, the New Gravity Affordable Housing Conference, where we'll have 50 different speakers talking about passive house design and other types of efficiencies, specifically around the benefits to affordable housing. So I'd encourage folks to check out that new, I'll put it in the agenda into the chat so people can take a look at that.
Thanks, Brian. So we're nearing the end, but there's a couple questions that I'm going to sort of put together, and they really do get to back to the first webinar we had, which is the urgency of climate action. There was a question on here about scale. There was another one about how do we scale if we have this urgency. How can we be much more effective and impactful at scale? And there's also a question that I really liked, which is about what are the big or maybe under-considered problems or challenges that entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs should be trying to address. I think oftentimes those two things are connected. You find scale, and that's your opportunity to not just be impactful, but also to be impactful in a big way. So how do we take everything we work on? I mean, you're all doing great work all the time, working really hard, but what's holding us back from really getting to that next level, of, allies on board, moving towards a sustainable future? And what are your thoughts on how we can meet this moment with climate urgency?
My quick answer, policy. And I think there's a huge important role, not for environmental advocates, but for those in the business community that are actually doing this work to be speaking out and getting connected to lawmakers around policy opportunities. That's really how we're going to scale what we need to scale. And I just want to add too, we're always making this case. We don't need to invent any new great technology. All we need to do is deploy what we already know at scale in the neighborhoods and communities that we know need it. And so that's the challenge, not coming up with a new technology.
Yeah, I'm thinking about this carefully because I think in an absence of policy, one of the traps that the AE industry falls into is we spend a lot of time in sustainability focusing on the thing that's solvable versus the thing that's not solvable. So I think it is to first give ourselves a break, you know, but then focus in a more limited way on the thing that would really drive community or decarbonization. You know, pick one or two things instead of doing everything badly. And so, you know, that's one of the things that we try to top note at SOM. We also fall into the trap of kind of over assessing everything. And I think with limited time and resources, we need to think more carefully where we're putting our energy. So can we get better at advocating with our clients for green power purchases or power purchase agreements with multiple stakeholders? You know, so it becomes more affordable. Can we get better in our communities to do that? Can we understand electrification better? We're already pretty connected on this, you know, the topic of energy codes. Can we use the 80-20 rule on embodied carbon? So, you know, if it's a flat building, what are we doing with our foundations? If it's a tall building, what are we doing with our floors and columns? How are we dealing with, you know, like aluminum? Our buildings are clad in metal, that's high embodied carbon. So I think we could all benefit from that kind of mentality where we try to focus in on what has the biggest impact. And then continue, as Brian says, we have to be advocates. We have to say, we can't be apolitical. We have to say that these things are just the right thing to do for the environment and we support them.
I would add that we have to come together and do the right thing for people and the environment. And that means coming up with a solution that works for everybody. In the existing building world, which is where we spend most of our time, it's a big problem. It's a huge problem and it's overwhelming. So what do you do when you got a huge problem? You break it up into smaller problems and you get to the hard work of solving that. So what's the solution for 3-story walk-ups? What's the solution for small business? We just have to get to work and do it. And if anybody out there has the magic sauce to figuring out how to do a very large number of small transactions, call me up, because that's really what this problem is about.
I like that. Well, we are nearly out of time. If you have any last comment that came up that you want to share, this is a chance, 30 seconds to share it. Any last thought with our audience? Otherwise, I'll close.
I have one,
yeah.
Which is everyone is welcome to this party. Everyone has a role to play. Whatever your passion is, if it's designing buildings or if it's marketing or producing Zoom meetings or whatever it is, bring your passion to this party and help us solve this problem.
That's great. Yeah, thank you. All right, with that, we're going to wrap up. Thank you so much to my panelists. That was a terrific conversation, went very fast. And again, thanks to Seth and Harry and the Quinlan School of Business for your support and for their centers. This is the third of 4. We have one more next week, same time, on Sustainable Chicago for All, where we're going to be doing a deeper dive on these inclusion and equity discussions that we touched on certainly today, but that's really going to be the focus. How does sustainability become sustainability for all? As Ann just said, you're all welcome to that. You're all welcome to watch the recordings of any of our prior webinars. And thank you so much for spending some time with us today. It was great. I had a great time. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.